Howdy partners, it's so good to be here again to talk about film. And here's a film I've been hotly anticipating since I first heard about it premiering in film festivals earlier this year. I know it's coming to Netflix later this month, but I just had to check out The House of Dynamite ASAP. And on the big screen too, preferably, for just the added ambience and also experiencing with the crowd and my father. Of course, this is the latest film from Catherine Bigelow, a well-renowned filmmaker by this point in time. She's made quite a reputation for herself in recent years for these very political war films, such as The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. And in fact, for The Hurt Locker, she is the first woman ever to have won an Oscar for Best Directing. Long overdue and well-deserved for that film. But now that I think about it, her last film was Detroit, which is a film I did appreciate, but it was back in 2017, so it's a pretty big 8-year gap since then. And here she arrives with a very timely subject for a film that is rather explosive. Pun totally intended, obviously. The basic premise of this film is that a nuclear missile has been detected on radar, and now the president and his whole political and military team have to act to intercept that missile before a mass casualty event. And then they have to take major decisions on what to do in the immediate future of this new political landscape. Does America go to war? I think we all inherently understand just how devastating those consequences would be. It would basically be global suicide by nuclear annihilation. Not really a comforting thought, and it's a reality that is frankly all too present today. It really does feel at times that each day is a blessing that we still get to experience. And the genius of this film is that we never get to see this big budget VFX explosion on the big screen. We never needed that. The question mark paired with this black screen that is this void silence that is absolutely deafening and infinitely more powerful than any VFX could conjure up. It really puts the emphasis on the human nature and the morality of our choices that we would eventually have to make in such a horror reality. So it begs the question, what would we do? A truly terrifying prospect to consider. At the cinema, we're all on the edge of our seats throughout the whole film. The ticking clock on screen of the imminent impact was dreadfully effective. But it was a human drama with the chaos and high wire emotions that elevates everything to an 11. And on that note, we have a fantastic ensemble cast. I'm not gonna go over everyone because there's quite a lot of actors. And though they don't necessarily have all that much screen time or things to say at times, their moments are scattered and divided throughout the various chapters of this film, but the emotions of these characters actually cut really deep, regardless of how much screen time they have. And each of them have their own unique nuances that make them feel like real human beings, and not just these inconsequential side characters in a film. Personally, I have two acting highlights in the film. The first will be Rebecca Ferguson, who's a senior officer at the White House Situation Room. She is under heavy pressure to do her job, trying to get all the right information to communicate to the president and the military chiefs, and at times it feels like that pressure is nearly unbearable. She's very competent in her job, yes, but she's still a human being. There is a moment where she chokes off her tears and gets back to her responsibilities that really resonate with me, and I'm sure it will with a lot of people. And then we have Gabriel Basso as the Deputy National Security Advisor, who is a rare voice of reason and diplomacy in this exceedingly chaotic and trying time. But I think the biggest casting surprise for me was for the President of the United States. I guess from the poster we can figure out who it is, and it's not exactly a secret, but I actually had no idea. And throughout most of the film, when we were looking at the screens of the video conference between all the different military and political personnel, we did have the POTUS screen, which is always blacked out, but we did hear his voice through this static radio. And since this film came out in 2025, I figured this film was probably filmed while Biden was still in office, and potentially Kamala Harris could have been president, and now we do know today, obviously, that Donald Trump is the president. So I honestly thought they were purposefully leaving it vague for interpretation, and I vividly remember thinking like, perhaps the voice vaguely did sound like Donald Trump, but not at all. I was totally awful now, and it's actually Idris Elba, who gives this vision of a very kind and cool president. I mean, wouldn't that be the dream instead of this raging lunatic our neighbors down south have? I'm Canadian, by the way. But still, even though he seems like a more reasonable and clear-headed person, what choice he makes still remains a mystery to us film viewers. And once again, I do think it's a much more powerful thing to just leave that open to interpretation because, well, that's the kind of reality we live in today. Thank God nothing like that happened, but how would we act? It leaves the question open for us. Now, when it comes to the craft of this film, I think it is superbly made. The set, lighting, and editing all work together in perfect tandem to create a powerful mood. Not only in terms of the visual aesthetics, but also in creating that feverish, chaotic vibe. And in terms of the presentation, I thought it was very slick. I particularly appreciated how they would explain the anagrams of all these various military or White House nomenclatures. And in terms of the mise-en-scène, I think there are a few very clever and noteworthy visual ideas presented to us. In the first chapter of the film, we have Rebecca Ferguson, who's leaving for work, and her son gives her this toy dinosaur, which during the entire crisis, at one point she puts it on her desk, and the dinosaur comment, the extinction of the dinosaurs themselves, mirroring what could potentially happen to us in this nuclear holocaust. I thought it was a very clever little detail, but there's still more on the whole animals idea, visually speaking. At one point in one of the chapter transitions, we see these tigers, which might be communicating this kind of hungry savagery that us humans exhibit, especially with us being on the brink of war and just obliterating the earth itself. But then there are more peaceful elements as well that introduce themselves later on in the film with animals. I thought it was a really nice touch. I think the only thing that rubs me slightly the wrong way in this film is the way the 3-act structure is used. It's a little stop and go, because in each one of these acts we have pretty much the same timeline. So once we reach the second act, we jump back all the way to the start of the first timeline, so there is some redundant information. Mind you, I am nitpicking here, but I do think it breaks the pacing up a little bit. Though it really isn't the end of the world, because as I mentioned, the characters are so strong, and it does give an interesting opportunity to flesh out all their perspectives and character traits in a really meaningful and compelling way. But even with that being said, I think this is an incredibly thought-provoking and powerful film, which is why I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Is this the most terrifying non-horror film of 2025? I think it just might be. It hits a little too close to home, doesn't it? Especially when I consider that the world seems just hell-bent on setting itself on fire. Whether it be in Europe with the whole Ukraine war, that is a disaster of a conflict that just seems to have no end in sight, and it could have devastating consequences for the whole world. And then Israel seems to be picking a fight with not just the Palestinians, but with literally everyone in the Middle East. Jesus fucking Christ. And of course, the USA has their fingers in every one of those pies, and to add insult to injury, now they seem to be adding Venezuela to all that. Don't we have enough conflict in the world? God help us all. Honestly, this film made me just want to just pick up the phone and call all my loved ones. And with all that being said, wishing you and your loved ones nothing but the best. It's Thanksgiving weekend here in Canada. I know in the US it's a month later if I'm not mistaken, but a very timely moment to be thankful for everything that I have in my life. Alright, that's enough for me today. Take care everyone, bye.